Some of you are making authentic connections with people, but then when you get in there and you make the authentic connection, you're wondering, what do I do next? So you have to have that knowledge and wisdom, or as I say, you have to go beyond information to revelation.
Ooh,
Because if you go from information to revelation, you can go to application. But
ooh.
let me say this, that's information, revelation, application. If you go from information to application without revelation, here's what you will miss. You will miss context, you will miss clarity.
Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption. And today we're talking with Vernon Wright, aka the Wright Leader, founder of Zero Apology Zone. Can't wait till I get my swag. I just ordered a Zero Apology Zone t-shirt because you know I have zero apologies for being the class disruption. You can see right now, actually, I'm rocking the Bronx Learning Lounge shirt. Shout out over there to Bronx Learning Lounge. I'm trying to get Constance on here. Come on, lady, let's make this happen. I want to hear about all that amazing work you're doing over there at Bronx Learning Lounge. But right now, we're speaking with Vernon Wright. Not only does he have an inspiring teacher journey story he's going to share with us, he's an entrepreneur, he's a speaker, he's one of EdTech's 2020 30 IT influencers that you need to be following. So make sure that you are following him on social media. He's on IG, he's on Twitter at The Right Leader. I've got those links in the description down below. And of course, smash that like button, all that good YouTube stuff. If you're new here, we love your beautiful face. Welcome. We have conversations like the one we're about to have on the regular. I cover news, politics, different things going on in the education world. So hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, stick around, and like I said, make sure you have out that pen and that pad to take some notes. I was thinking about dropping this one for the new year, you know, like new year, new me, get reset. But what I've been doing personally is I've been starting to set those habits right now, just little by little, building them up. So by the time that new year hits, I'm taking off, not just trying to build it up. So get ready to get down some teacher steps to get rejuvenated, re-energized, and ready to take off on that new year. So without any further ado, Mr. Vernon Wright. How we doing? It's so good to finally get you in here.
Well, I am blessed beyond measure. And let me just go ahead and say to everybody that is listening to this episode, you know better than to come into an episode on this podcast without being ready to go ahead and take some copious notes, because we were just talking about that. So if you thought this was going to be one of those podcasts where you just kind of listen and you kind of drift out a little bit and you come back in and listen a little more, well, this might not be the podcast for you. This is the podcast for the deep thinkers, which I know you're a one. How can I say that? Because you are here with us. So what an honor it is to be with you.
And man, blessings all around. I got my pen and paper out ready here, ready to go too. I was like, that was that warning when the teacher says, "Are you taking notes?" Not that it's as effective anymore with the
Right. Yeah, we're gonna be, and it's funny you mentioned that because and this is not really the subject of what we're really gonna go into, but for those that are wondering, when should I start taking notes? This is a good time.
Hey, all
It's a
right.
good
So
time right now, right?
exactly, because you're about to let everybody know. For those who don't, I mean, you're internationally known at this point. But, for people who are a little bit behind, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? What are you all about?
Absolutely. The name is Vernon Wright, and I tell people that that's what I think it is, unless somebody changed it on the birth certificate and didn't tell me. So Vernon Wright, entrepreneur, speaker, visionary, leader, consultant, NLP life coach. For those that are fans of neuro-linguistic programming, I'm a huge fan of that and help people use those tools to be better in life, hence the combination of NLP and being a life coach. School leader, have had some experience in school leadership and education in various different roles, and just so honored to be here. And really, for me, a lot of people have asked me over the years, Vernon, who are you? What are you about? Much like the question you just asked me, right? And my response typically is this, and I will say this to the folks that are out there. If you do not have a personal, what I call a personal impact statement, when I do a lot of coaching one-on-one with my clients, I encourage each of them, and really I almost tell them, if you're going to be working with me as your coach, it's mandatory for you to have a personal impact statement. And so I'll give you kind of a brief paraphrase as to what mine is. So here's what I do. I work with leaders, individuals, and organizations, really looking at talents and gifts that they have within the organization, and how we can leverage those talents and gifts within the organization, looking through the lens of organizational dynamics, so we can achieve this thing called synergy. And once we achieve the thing called synergy, what can we do? We can achieve the extraordinary. So that's what I do. So whether you were to meet me, or whether we would be at a Starbucks, or whether we would be at a conference, wherever else, you would say, there's that synergy guy. He's always talking about making authentic connections with people and making an impact. We'll talk a little bit later, hopefully, if we have time. But there are three things that I always talk about when I speak at conferences. And when I'm working with clients, whether it's one-on-one coaching or whether it's districts or other things. And those three things are this. Another great place to take notes, give you guys a little breadcrumb right there.
All right
The
here.
three things are connect, impact, and scale.
Mm,
Connect, impact, and scale. And that is really one of the cornerstone sets of values that is a part of what I do. Connect, impact, scale. One more time, because we love repetition. Connect, impact, and scale. So
scale.
that's a little bit about me.
And I mean, there was so much there, but I was taking my notes. Don't worry. So, definitely impact statement. I'm gonna come up with mine. Hopefully, I can compete with yours. Two things: synergy. That is like one of the few things that I actually remember from high school. I took like a biology of the brain class, and we
Right?
talked about like the synergistic effect. So it's like you take one thing and then you take another thing. It's not 1 + 1. It's whoosh, off to the races when you start combining different substances. So I love that. I want to take this to the next level. I'm already feeling the energy and the heat.
Yeah, and I'll say something right there for folks that are listening and they're wondering, yeah, okay, well, I know synergy and da 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 da, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to challenge you. Yes, I challenge people. And as my good friend Aubrey Patterson says, we're kind of demanding things in a warm kind of way. We're going to push you. But I'm going to challenge you as we go through and we kind of unpack this thing and navigate through a lot of different things. We're going to go deep, and we're going to go a little bit below that surface level of synergy. But let me say this real quick. In the popular vernacular, or as they would say on the streets, and for those that speak Spanish, in las calles, you would frequently say, or we would maybe say in common vernacular, when you vibe with someone,
Mm,
when you vibe.
vibing.
So
Yes.
when we talk about synergy, if you're kind of thinking, well, Vernon, where's kind of an entry point for me to enter into this concept of synergy? I just want you to think about vibing. When you've been vibing with someone, whether that was in a professional context, whether it was in a personal context, when you met somebody and you said, you know what, Vernon, man, Vernon Stephanie, man, I met the person like 5 minutes ago, and it feels like I've known them for like 20
Yep.
years. That's synergy. That's
I know what
vibing.
you're talking about. And I know we already vibing because you came in with the zero apology background. And I'm all about that class disruption, saying something wild and crazy. No apologies. I like to set the the scope of the conversation out wide, right? I don't want to be
Absolutely.
kept in here. So that class disruption is about kind of saying that wild thing, having no apologies about it, but everybody else was thinking it. So,
Absolutely. It's about engagement. And and I will say this, having been very blessed to have been in a lot of different roles, started out many, many, many moons ago. I don't want to say how long ago, because I'm trying to go ahead and keep my youthful appearance. As one of my friends says, the secret is cocoa butter. Hopefully it's working.
oh,
But
looking good, looking good.
cocoa butter, right? And put a little bit on the beard as well. But started out as a high school teacher many, many moons ago. Went through a few different things. Was approached about year two, year three in the business about this thing called leadership. And I was kind of like, no, you can take that. No, thank you. Thank you, but no, thank you. And kind of went on. And for those that are a little more seasoned, or even if you're a little younger and maybe you're a fan of 80s music, I often make a reference or allusion to this band called Flock of Seagulls. And Flock of Seagulls had a song called I Ran. And part of the lyrics say, and I ran so far away. And so, what I've told people many times, as I've shared the story at different conferences and speaking engagements, is when I was approached about leadership, my theme song, if I look back on it now, was really that Flock of Seagulls song. I know there many people are like, let me get on Spotify or Shazam and
I
check
know,
that
I
out,
know. I wrote it
or
down. I'm like,
Apple
I gotta look
Music and
this
check
up.
that out, right? But I ran from that. I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't interested in graduate school. I wasn't interested in anything else. My original plan was, of course, I'm down here in the Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas area, as we would say down here in the Texas region, North Texas.
Okay.
And my original plan was just to teach because I was a career changer. I had a whole nother career in business before I got into education. My bachelor's degree is in economics and finance. My master's degree is in educational leadership. And my plan was just to teach for a while and retire and just kind of think about, what am I going to do beyond education? But my plan was never to do anything beyond teaching. And I kind of got coerced into teacher leadership. And then once I got into teacher leadership, I had some angels come into my life. And this is another great place to take notes. And I have often shared this that I'm getting ready to share with you all. So once again, another little breadcrumb here for you. If you're taking notes, this is a good place to take notes at. People come into your life for a reason and for a season. Let me say that one more time. People come into your life for a reason and for a season. That can be a student, that can be a colleague, that can be a supervisor, that can be a mentor, that can be whomever it is in a professional way or in a personal way. And so I had some angels come into my life that at that moment in time, they saw leadership in me when I didn't see it in myself. And when we bring this back to the classroom, how many of us that are veteran educators, and I know we have a lot of veteran educators listening and watching this, and even those that are new to the profession, correct? Congratulations for picking an awesome profession, an awesome career. You know that we have had students that there have been those times when maybe we believed in the students more than the students believed in themselves. And, just getting real and authentic with your audience. I hope this is a safe place where I can do that. I remember many, many moons ago as a high school teacher starting out and thinking to myself, these kids are 16, 17, 8 years old. For some of them, this is the end of their formal structured academic education. Are they even listening to me? Are they listening to me? Or am I just kind of talking to air and some people just kind of have happen to be in the room, right?
So black screens now.
Absolutely, right. And I will tell you a very, very brief story. I was going to a home improvement store, right? I won't say the name of the store because I want to give them free advertising, but I was going to a home improvement store and I was going to do some home improvement stuff in my home, right? Just to fix some kind of stuff. Don't tell anybody, but I might have just a little bit of DIY skills, but we're going to leave that.
Okay.
We're going to leave that there, right? And I passed by this young man. He was about 20, 22, 23, maybe. And it was just like in the movies where you turn, the person turns and looks at you, and you're like, and we just had that moment.
You had a
And
moment.
we
Okay.
had that moment. And here this young man was 22, 23 years old. And he called my name and he said, Mr. Wright. And I said, yeah. And I called his name after all of those years, right? And because that would have been what, about 6 years since he and I had met. And he said, man, I'm married, I have a family, I'm working, I'm going back to school. And he said, do you remember years ago you taught this lesson and it was da 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 da? And I was like, I don't even know if I remember that lesson, right? And he told me, he said, I know you thought, Mr. Wright, that I wasn't listening and some of my classmates weren't listening because at the time, he was only interested in the social things about school. He really wasn't interested in the academic things. And he said, I remember a lot of those lessons that you taught me. I just wasn't at the point in my life where I could really receive them fully and act on them.
Mm.
And I will tell you, so we talked to her a little bit and we did that. And I went into the home improvement store. I got the DIY stuff I needed. And by the way, I did fix that properly, the DIY project there. And I sat in my car, right? I sat in my car and I was sitting there thinking, wow, here I was, and I went into a home improvement store to get some DIY equipment, and I had an experience. And let me say this real quick for those that are taking notes. You need to be prepared to prepare students for experiences. And curriculum is great, content knowledge is great. I've worked around some really, really, really smart people. I'm talking about people with multiple doctorates, multiple master's degrees. But the one thing whether we're in person or virtual, that will always be the most important thing is the connection between two human beings.
Boom. That's the
The
first thing to
connection
connect.
between two human beings. Yeah. So it's the connection, folks. And let me say this: if you're saying, you know what, Vernon, man, I'm on the Zoom screen. Sometimes the students show their faces, sometimes they don't. I think it's just me, the computer, and Zoom and the Zoom app. And I don't think anybody's listening. Let me tell you right now, you're planting seeds, and there's going to be a day in the near future when those seeds are going to bloom and they're going to blossom, and you're going to be so surprised at your having been smart enough and wise enough to plant those
Mm.
seeds and how they have come back to just bless you.
Whew, I was just reading a story today with some of my kids for their English class because I'm a social studies teacher, but I was helping them with their English. And it was called The Natural World. And it talked about how wildflowers, they are programmed to germinate at different times, right? Some pop right away, but if because the weather is so harsh, if they all popped at the same time, but it didn't rain, then the species would die out. And so they pop at different times, some the next year, some even later than that. And so I feel like our kids are also like wildflowers as well.
That's correct, because I'm going to tell you, even from my standpoint, it's really funny that you mentioned that. And let me go ahead and give your listeners and viewers another hint. This is another place to get ready to take some notes. Um, Beware of the late bloomers,
Hmm.
because I was a late bloomer.
Okay.
And I thought that, I maybe I didn't peak in high school, and I should have peaked in high school. Maybe I didn't peak after finishing undergrad, and I'm kind of looking for where's my groove going to be, right? And what you just said is so phenomenal,
Hmm.
because every person has a place, and every person has a current and future impact in the grand scheme
Hmm.
of things.
Yep.
And just like you said, if I was too early, I would have missed my impact. Now, I still could have had an impact, but it would have been a little bit limited. So if I tried to do zeroapologyzone.com, just got to throw that in there for the website. But
Yes.
if I had tried to do zeroapologyzone.com when I was a first year teacher, the timing wouldn't have been right. The timing wouldn't have been right. I wouldn't have had the information that I was operating with. So, in other words, I had to go through a process of doing two things. I had to accumulate knowledge and wisdom, and I had to make authentic connections with people. Let me go ahead and say that again if you're taking notes. I had to accumulate the knowledge and wisdom, and I had to make authentic connections with people. And the reason why I had to get the authentic knowledge and wisdom was so that when I made a connection with someone that was an authentic connection, I would have the knowledge to guide me on what the next steps are. Some of you are making authentic connections with people, but then when you get in there and you make the authentic connection, you're wondering, what do I do next? So
Hmm.
you have to have that knowledge and wisdom, or as I say, you have to go beyond information to revelation.
Ooh.
Because if you go from information to revelation, you can go to application. But
Ooh.
let me say this, that's information, revelation, application. If you go from information to application without revelation, here's what you will miss: you will miss context, you will miss clarity.
Hmm.
Every single person that you come into contact with, whether it's a colleague or whether it's a student, they have a story. Everyone, I have a story. I'm telling my story here on your podcast. What an honor and privilege it is, by the way. And you have a
Likewise to
story,
have you here.
right?
You the teacher preacher out
There
here.
you go. So you have a story, right? Now, if I am trying to make an authentic connection, how can I make that without knowing some of your story?
Hmm.
How can you make an authentic connection with me without knowing some of my story? Because here's what your story tells people. Your story tells people not only what you've been through, but what you're looking to
Hmm.
achieve. Let me say that one more time. It tells them not only what you've been through, but what you're looking to achieve. And also does this: your story, this is a big one, your story simply symbolizes your values. Your
Hmm.
story symbolizes your. So the next time you say, well, I told a person a little bit about my background and kind of where I was, you've just told a person about your values.
Hmm. dang, I need you to come talk to my class. I'm having to write a personal narrative, and they're like, why?
Oh,
And
let
I'm
me
like,
tell you, it's an opportunity because I'm going to tell you when people understand, and I'm so glad you brought that up because here's how, and they don't mean they're not trying to be nefarious, they're not trying to be malicious. There's two vocabulary words. If you have any students that are watching or listening to this, nefarious and malicious, y'all look that up and got to go ahead and get a handle on that one. But they're not trying to be nefarious or malicious, but we have some educators that are teaching writing and they're giving students this learning experience of writing from a very prescriptive manner. What are the elements of writing? I'm not against that. I think there is a place for that. But what really motivates and encourages someone is not the structure of writing, it's the opportunity to be seen and to be heard and to connect. Let me say that one more time: to be seen, to be heard, and to connect. That is what motivates someone. How many times have you all that are listening and watching to this, you've had a student that maybe is a reluctant learner? They maybe don't want to do an assignment. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. But when you ask the class, hey, I have an opinion. I have a question. I need all of you all's opinion. What do you think about this? Which one of these is good? Which one of these is best? Is not good? And I will tell you this: I did this many moons ago when I was still in the classroom. But I asked some students one day, right now here I am. I'm a high school teacher dealing with some students that they don't think school is for them. They're just kind of there, but they don't really want to go ahead and go and do anything else, right? Kind of, hopefully, I'm sitting back in the corner. Mr. Wright will not see me, and I can just kind of disappear until the class period is over and I can go to the next class, right? So one day I did this. One day I said, hey, before we get into the lesson today, I have a question. They said, yeah, Mr. Wright, what's the question? I said, which one is better, PS4 or PlayStation? And we didn't have a PS4 back then, but I said, PlayStation or Xbox? Which one is better?
Oh, I
Oh
bet
my
they were.
goodness.
Oh my.
Oh my goodness. I had to say, please, everybody don't talk over each other. Please, hands raised. Let's go one at a time. Mr. Wright, let me tell you what I've got. I've got. Then guess what I found out? I found out some students had a PS, a PlayStation, and an Xbox. I didn't even know that, right? So here I am getting a glimpse into what they're doing instead of homework.
Got relevant real quick. Got
right?
relevant.
So
super
what I
quick.
did was I invited them into my story. Let me say that again. For your teachers and educators that are listening, I invited them into my story. Once I invited them into my story, I didn't have to use extrinsic motivation. I leveraged the intrinsic motivation. I leverage the intrinsic motivation. If you're looking for a book to go deeper on this, we could do a whole session on this. Of course, we don't, but we can't because of time constraints. But the book Drive by Daniel Pink, I highly recommend that. One of my favorite all-time books. Talks a lot about extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So we have a lot of teachers that are trying to do something from the outside, and I understand that. I used to do that some as well. But once I read that book, Drive by Daniel Pink, my lenses changed. And I started asking myself this question throughout all of my roles, even when I'm working with clients now or I'm doing speaking engagements. I ask myself this question: how can I invite people into my story?
Ooh, that's what I'm gonna start my class with on Monday. And it works so good with what we're doing right now. But I want to switch gears a little bit. And I wanted, I was listening to a lot of your stuff, like leadership. You're on it. I was looking over your content. And one thing that I noticed is very consistent. Like it's very like it doesn't necessarily. I've been seeing a lot of people kind of like grift a little bit, I think, in the last like 6 months with all of this like social justice, anti-racist, and it started like really in like the last 2 years. I've seen this new fad come in, and I'm not like, I think there's a lot of things to be had from it, a lot of positives, but I also feel like a lot of people are just kind of like echoing a lot of the language, and I don't see you doing that. The one place where I did see you use equity is when you're talking about your relationship with Microsoft and why you teamed up with them and what you've been doing with them. So I was just hoping I could get your take on like equity and kind of this shift to like this social justice lens that's been coming into education.
Yeah, wonderful. It's almost like you were in my head the last 2 to 3 days, and working with some clients. that are district school districts that I work with and other organizations that I work with, but also too some of my coaching clients that are one-on-one clients of mine in my private coaching. We've been talking a lot about equity and social justice and racism and all of this that really kicked off. For those of you that obviously remember the event, the date, if I remember correctly, was May the 25th of 2020 with the tragic death of George Floyd. And then everything just popped off, right?
Mm.
And is still going. And one of the things that I will share with your listeners and your viewers is this. And again, so humbled and honored to be with you all. What a blessing. I mean, really, really, really is. Thank you all that are listening, that are watching. Just thank you so much. I look at a lot of things through a lot of different lenses, and this is another thing I'm going to drop. Hopefully, I drop a little pro tip for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Let me drop you guys
Listen,
a little free
don't need
game, a
my
little.
permission. No apology.
Yeah, all right, let me give you a little free game, a little pro tip. You need to have different lenses and you need to know what those lenses are. So for me, I have a businessman lens, I have an educator lens, I have a speaker lens, I have a leader lens. I have different lenses. And so when something and I'm looking at something in my professional or personal life, I consciously try to look at whatever this thing is through different lenses. When I'm asked to speak at a conference, I'm looking at that through the lens of a speaker. I'm looking at it through the lens of an entrepreneur and businessman. I'm looking at it through the lens of a consultant. I'm looking at it through the lens of an educator. So you need to have multiple lenses, okay? Now, I said that because I'm getting ready to go into really what you've asked me to, and what a great invitation. One of the things that I noticed this summer was we had a lot of different people speaking about social justice, about equity. They were speaking on these topics, right? And the first thing that I want to say is this: I do not want anyone to feel like, you know what? I feel shamed, Vernon. Maybe I'm not a certain race. I feel like I'm guilty. I feel shamed. I feel like I'm in such a bad place. I feel like I'm a horrible person. And I have seen in some different spaces and places over the last few months where people have spoken about these topics, and some of the people in the audience felt like, you know what, I'm so just beat down
Mm,
emotionally and mentally after what I have heard and what has been really just placed on me, that I really don't know what to do. I'm really just disencouraged
mm,
because this person just really just dumped all of this on me, right? So I want to say this to folks that are speaking about this. Um, Anytime you are trying to get someone to understand a perspective, really the end goal is to change behavior. Let me say that one again. It is to change behavior. Now, I could come in within the equity space and I could say, you know what? If you just do these 15 things, you will then have addressed equity within your organization, within your school district, within your classroom, within your school, your campus, whatever it is. If you just do these 15 things. And what I saw a lot of people, again, they weren't trying to be nefarious, they weren't trying to be malicious, but I saw a lot of people taking an approach to speaking to these topics that was very prescriptive. And
mm.
one of the things that as a speaker that I have tried to do, and I'm going to switch, we talked about lenses, right? I'm going to switch lenses real quick. And I'm going to go to my businessman entrepreneur lens. And so one of the things that I do is I always ask myself, how can I provide value that is distinctive? How can I provide value and speak to something in a distinctive way? So if everyone else is talking about equity in all of these different kind of prescriptive ways, don't do this, do this thing, don't do this, and here's my list of 25 things for you to do. um, I understand that, and there's some value in that. But the real question I have to ask is, has that really changed behavior? Now, I'm going to go ahead and give your listeners and your viewers a little story and a little example and a metaphor that I often use with people to demonstrate this. And if there's anyone out there that has read the book Leverage Leadership or Leverage Leadership 2.0 by the great, phenomenal Dr. Paul Bambrick Santoyo, great educational
I'm just
leader, has,
impressed with your recall on these things.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
that book by that guy.
Absolutely. One of
Can't
my
wait,
favorite
you
all-time
know?
books. Now, back when I read it, it was Leverage Leadership. It wasn't Leverage Leadership 2.0, but there's Leverage Leadership and then Leverage Leadership 2.0. Your viewers, when they're looking for it, they'll know it because they'll see a picture of a hammer on the front cover.
Okay.
But we're going to be talking about leverage here for a second. But anyway, let me ask you a question, Stephanie, if I could, if you could just kind of
Yeah.
play along with me for the benefit of your audience. Hopefully, we're delivering value to them. So happy to have you all with us on the journey of this podcast episode. So let me ask you, Stephanie, if you eat vegetables, is that good for you?
That's what my mom said.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Not a trick question. Yeah. Not a trick question. I ask people that all the time. They're like, okay, Vernon, where are you going with this? I say, hey, just stick with me. I'm a trained professional, right? Just stick with me, right? So we know that eating vegetables is good, right? Yeah. We all agree on that, right? Okay. So we have that knowledge, right? Okay. Everybody has that knowledge. So why is it that when I look at, and I was at the grocery store earlier today, why is it that when I look at people's carts as they pass by me, I don't see a lot of vegetables? Why is that?
Because sugar, it dings off that dopamine a little bit more effectively, right?
Right. Okay. So then let me ask you this, right? Which you're absolutely spot on with that answer. What does cause someone to eat more vegetables and to really before that to change their shopping list to buy vegetables? What causes someone to do that?
Well, I think that there's probably at least two paths, right? There's going to be the person who kind of like that's the way they were brought up, like, and so it's kind of been ingrained in them their whole life, like I
Right.
guess like they were trained like that. And then
Right.
there's probably the category of people who they're like, oh, I'm facing like some really bad health consequences. Let me switch up my diet. I'm sure there's more than two categories, but broadly speaking.
Absolutely. But the second one that you spoke of is really the one that applies to a lot of different people.
Mhm.
So, in other words, again, if you're taking notes here, this is a great place to take notes. I had the knowledge, they had the knowledge of vegetables, right? This was not an academic knowledge issue. But what happened was eating vegetables was no longer academic, it became personal. Let me say that one more time
Woo!
because some of you are approaching learning from the perspective of academics, and that's not the leverage point. Again, leverage leadership 2.0. Dr. Paul Bamberg Santoyo had the privilege of meeting him one time many years ago for a one-day conference. The guy was phenomenal, came down here to the Dallas area. But let me say this one more time. They had the knowledge that eating vegetables was good, but the knowledge didn't move them. What moved them is when eating vegetables became personal. So let me go ahead and ask you this: in the realm of making instruction relevant, has your instruction become personal to your students?
Mm.
Has it become personal to them? Has it become part of their lives? Have they, and let me say this one more time, and this goes into culturally relevant instruction. We don't have time to do a whole episode on this, but I must throw this in and sprinkle the dialogue with this. Have your students seen themselves in your lesson?
Mm.
Have they seen themselves in your lesson? So, in other words, has school, quote unquote, has school become this exercise that is something that is in a physical or digital textbook? Or has school become something where kids say, school is my life? What we're learning is part of my life.
And I
And
think
because, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I
Yes.
was just going to say,
Yes.
like, I think we are kind of trapped in this very narrow idea of like seeing yourself in the curriculum. Like, it always comes out to be like a race thing or a gender thing or like things that are pretty superficial. But I mean, I teach pretty much like all, like, most of my students are like Dominican, Puerto Rican. We have like African kids. So, but they're, even though they're like, I guess if you look at them, they might look like they're all similar, but they are so diverse. I have kids who love to skateboard. I have gamers. I have kids who are in mechanics. Like, and to me, that's where the real, like, connection
Right.
comes
So
from.
let me say this real quick. Another great place to take notes, folks. I'm getting ready to drop one on you real heavy. If someone is speaking to equity, and the only thing they speak about is race, they're leaving out the thing that really is the foundation.
Hmm.
Get ready to write this down.
Hmm.
Any discussion about equity does not start with race. Any authentic discussion about equity must start with identity.
Hmm.
Because if I only see someone for the color, I don't see the person behind the color. So, what this becomes, any discussions about equity, is it becomes color against color. Now, see what happens is I see this issue of color. I see people being treated differently for color. But if I don't go deeper than that and beyond that, I always see this as a quote unquote color issue. But
Mm,
then once I start to understand the identity of people, I start to understand why they treat other people that look differently the way they do. Or, in other words, as one of my mentors says often, hurt people hurt people.
mm,
Let me say that one more time. Hurt people hurt people. So when people have been hurt, what do? They hurt other people. So when we get into these issues of equity and unpacking race, if I don't talk about the identity within the person and what they're carrying within, to tell them just treat black people differently, they can understand that, they can know that, they can know that that's good. Let's go back to our example about vegetables. It becomes what? It becomes academic knowledge.
mm,
No one disputes that. No one disputes that. You know what? I should treat everyone well. I
mm.
should give. And let me say this real quick about equity, because equity, and this is something a lot of people are not talking about. But when we look at equity through the lens of, are we providing opportunities? As a good friend of mine says, he's an African American superintendent down here in the Texas area. And when we talk often, he says, you know what, Vernon, he says, anytime we talk about the achievement gap, the one thing people are not talking about is the opportunity gap. And I wish we could go real deep into that one. But anytime it's so interesting, over the years, I've been in different meetings in different places and different spaces, and people say, well, what does the data say? And I said, well, you know what? That's great that we're looking at the data, but what generated the data?
Mm,
What generated the data? Because, see, if I'm looking at the data, I'm looking at a lagging indicator. For those that may be wondering,
right.
another great place to take notes, there is a book you need to plug into called The Four Disciplines of Execution by
Mm,
Sean Covey, son of the late, great Dr. Stephen Covey. The four disciplines of execution. He talks about leading indicators and lagging indicators. So when we get into looking at the data, and the data shows what we call this quote unquote achievement gap, what people are saying is get the numbers to change. But what they really should be at, which is a lagging indicator approach, but what they really should be asking is what opportunities led to these numbers. So that tells me what I need to change, because if I'm always thinking about trying to change some numbers from giving some test or doing something that is academic, I am always fighting a losing battle rather than going all, because see, that's putting a band-aid on something that needs intense surgery.
oh
Let me
man.
say that again. That's
Woo.
putting a band-aid on something that needs intense surgery. So when I look beyond someone's color, acknowledging their color, but first acknowledging their identity, I start to understand what's going on with them. I start to understand how they interact with people. And then I start to ask myself, have they been given the same opportunities as other people? Because what some people think in equity is, if I just do these 10 or 12 things and check mark these boxes, then I'm good, right, Vernon? And I'm like, no, you're not good. Because here's what you've done: you've recognized the issue overall. And I will say this too, I thought it quite interesting in late May and early June, especially the first 2 weeks of June, how I saw different organizations release statements about the tragic death of George Floyd, and all of the things and topics around that. And I read these statements, right? I'm looking at them through the lens of a speaker. I read these statements and I said, you know what? That statement has no heart. It has no spirit in it. It sounds like someone at a PR firm put that together. So we have to understand also, too, I want to drop this one in there when we're talking about equity. There must be authenticity.
Mm,
There must be authenticity. We must also understand that every human being, we've said this before a few minutes ago, I'll drop it again. We must understand that every single person must do what? Every single person has a desire to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. To be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. And if you've ever had a kid that maybe has had some behavior that's been off task, we often ask this question in the business: what is the reason for the behavior?
mm,
What's the reason for the behavior? Is that attention seeking behavior?
mm.
And maybe that's the only way the student knows to get that.
Yeah, it's like I feel like anytime I ask those questions, I'm either told that I'm not focused on the issue, that I'm bringing up points that, don't matter. I'm centering my whiteness, things like that. These kind of like rhetorical phrases. And one thing this is a little bit off topic, I wasn't planning to ask you, but I've been getting into this like I feel like it's a semantic thing when people will say some people say I don't see color, but when what they mean is that I don't see you. But I don't To me that feels like a semantic game that doesn't really capture what people are trying to say.
Yeah. So here's the thing with that, the I don't see color thing, right? Because we do see color, right?
Right,
We do
like
see.
literally we know that you obviously see color.
We see color, and I'm going to tell you this. When people see color, and people are going to laugh at this and say, Vernon, you're trying to marginalize this. Absolutely not. Stick with me. I'm going to come back around full circle. When people see color, when they go to buy a car. Now, the Model T Ford, if it's my recollection through reading history, certainly I was not alive back then. The Model T Ford, when it was first made, it was the only color it came in was black. So why aren't all cars now just in one color of black? Why is it that when you go to the grocery store, there's just not one flavor of ice cream in the frozen food section? So in other words, to deny color is to deny variety. We want
Right.
variety. Okay.
Right.
Now, let me go a little bit deeper and to say this. When a person says that they don't recognize color, that's not really the full story. So in other words, what they're really saying, how many of you know that when people say something to you, sometimes you have to kind of have your own, for those of you that use a translator app, you kind of have to translate, right? So I'm going to give you a translation app version of that. So in other words, when a person says, I don't see color, what they're really saying is, I see who you are, and through visual, physical acuity, I see your color, but I see beyond.
Right. I'm not judging you based on
I see
right.
beyond, right? So in other words, I don't stereotype. Now, if I don't see you for what race you are, and I'm looking beyond that, then I'm denying a part of who you are. See, I don't want to deny what color you are. I just don't want to stop there.
Right. Okay.
Now remember, for those of you that are kind of unpacking this, identity comes first, because a person is an identity first in their spirit, in their soul, and all of that's housed in a body. They're an identity first. Then we start looking at who they are in terms of a race. So when we look at a person's race, I'm not just looking at somebody might look at me and say, okay, that's a black person. That's an African-American man. Yes, absolutely I am. But if you stop there, you'll miss way, 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 way too much. You'll miss so much that you could understand about even deeper. So in other words, let's connect this back to what we were talking about earlier. Let me invite you into my story.
Right.
Let me invite you into my story. So what happens is the point of entry into talking about equity is obviously race. And why is it race? Because that's something people can see. Color is something people can see, right? But do we stop there? No, we don't. We go beyond that and we start talking about some different things like bias. And people talk about bias. Well, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. All bias is bad. Well, I'm going to tell you what I shared with a client not too long ago. All bias is not bad.
It is. Listen, I
why
discriminate all the
all
time.
bias is not bad? You know what? Here's why all bias is not bad, right? You have a degree. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, right. You have a degree, certified educator. You have a bias towards higher education. Is that correct?
That was the choice that I made. I discriminated
absolutely
against other choices for that. Yep.
Right. Because if you had a bias,
I discriminate against all other beverages besides water. This is my favorite beverage.
There you go. So because we're going to talk about bias now, all bias is not bad. If you had a bias against higher education, you would not have pursued it. But because you pursued higher education, how many lives have you been able to impact?
I mean,
countless lives, right? Now and lives into the future, countless lives. So is that a bad bias then?
No, but it doesn't necessarily make it like the only way either.
That's correct, right? So in other words, what does each person have? Each person, we talked about this earlier, each person has a story. Now your bias typically a person's bias, when they start going down deep into this and they start making connections, their bias in terms of the things that they choose to do professionally and in terms of advancement, their bias is in line with their talents. You've never heard anybody say that on a podcast. Their bias is in line with their talents. It's in alignment with their talents. So if you have someone that is talented and really gifted. I have a friend of mine. He's in a doctoral program right now. We were talking last night. He's very gifted and talented in that area. So what did his bias lead him to do? It led him to get his bachelor's degree, master's degree, and now he's in a doctoral program. He's working on his PhD. So that's a good bias because that bias is what? In line and in alignment with his talents and his gifts, which allows him to do that. Now, guess what happens? When he comes into contact, here's how your bias in the present can prepare you to affect lives profoundly, positively in the future. So if he is working on that now in the present, that's his bias to be in a PhD program. Every other person whose path comes across his that has similar talents and similar aspirations, he's the guy for them to go ahead and have this destiny kind of meeting with. Again, like I said earlier, sometimes people are put into your life for a reason and for a season. Now, you might have someone else, and I'll just give you an example. There's a man that I know. He's a very wealthy man that lives here locally, and he's a millionaire. He has a high school education. Okay. He didn't go beyond that. Now, for students that feel like, maybe college is not my deal or whatever, when they come across his path, what is he able to do? He's able to speak to his talents and gifts and how he went beyond his high school education to position himself for success. So there is not just one path and there's not just one way, but we have to understand that what our bias does is our bias guides us. And let me drop this little pro tip in there for folks that are really trying to go beyond if you just do these 20 things, my checklist of 20 things, you've addressed bias. When people understand that bias is a product of decision making, they'll start looking at their decision making differently.
What's up? Oh, my son. What do you want? Oh, you want to come hang out?
Good stuff.
I'm sorry. All right, you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying that when people understand that bias is a product of their decision making, they'll start looking at their decision making differently. So in other words, here's what happens. People say that's bias, implicit bias. Don't do implicit bias. But what they're not getting to, again, going back to that book by Sean Covey, what they're not getting to is they're speaking to a lagging indicator. They're not speaking to a leading indicator. So if I tell you don't do something, you're always going to be thinking, okay, I don't need to do that. I don't need to. You're going to be thinking in the negative, right? But now if I
tell you that has happened to me so much over the past like 4 or 5 months, I become so much more conscious of like, oh, how should I do and I've been in a super diverse place my whole life, never had these thoughts. And now all of a sudden I feel like super self-conscious about stuff.
Right. So if we shift that and we start thinking about what is my thinking about? Who am I? Now, I'm going to drop this tip in here too for folks, and this is something that I have each of my clients do that I work with in my private coaching business, is this. Have each of my clients not only write down their personal impact statement, like we talked about earlier at the beginning of the episode, but I have them start to talk about what are their goals and what are the things that make up who they are. And we go very, very, very deep into this, very, very deep. Because before I can change my behavior, I have to understand who I am that's making my behavior currently. Okay.
That's big. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to understand that. So before I can go forward and before I can get to my destination, I have to know where I'm at right now. And what's happening is, and this is kind of an elephant in the room, since late May, June, July, August, September, all off into the fall, right? And I'm sure some people will be doing it off into 2021, unfortunately. We have people that are trying to, quote unquote, address issues of bias and equity without doing the introspection, and it will never, ever be a sustained effort that is authentic. So in other words, for people to have a sustained, authentic effort in unpacking equity and looking at what equity is, I need to stop and ask myself, who am I as a person? So in other words, what does I go back to? identity.
Mm.
Because see, if a person just sees themselves as just a race or a color, they're trying to go ahead and change their behavior is just this one single thing as a color. They're not looking beyond that. So I don't deny the color that I am. I'm proud of that and I recognize that. But I tell people, hey, don't stop there. There's so much more underneath the surface, because if I understand my current thinking, then I can go ahead and understand where I am now and where I'm trying to go. So when, in other words, let me say this to folks that are taking notes, I can get myself in alignment
Mm.
so that when bias comes in from this side or bias comes in from this side, what I can say to myself is that's not in alignment with who I am.
Mm.
I don't need Stephanie to tell me that. I can tell myself that.
Yeah.
Right? And Stephanie doesn't need me to tell her that. Stephanie is in alignment with who Stephanie is. And if Stephanie is in alignment with her values and her values are noble, they are just and they are honorable, then I don't need to give Stephanie a list of 30 things.
Mm.
Her values internally and her being in alignment guide Stephanie every single day. Now, let me go ahead and give you an example. I'm going to use an exaggeration here, obviously for purposes, right?
Okay.
All right. You're a certified educator. Certainly you've had to go through a background check. You have no criminal history or anything.
Oh
Let me
yeah,
go
got
ahead
my
and
fingerprints cleared. We're good.
right. I've been through many fingerprint checks myself over the years, locally at the state level and federally as well. So obviously you've never ever committed a crime. Okay. Right. So I just want to say that before I use this example.
Haven't been caught, you know?
This is just right. This is just an example. Okay. All right. So I come up to Stephanie one day and Stephanie says, you know what, Vernon, man, I'm low on cash. It's Christmas time. I'm low on cash, and I'm gonna go rob a bank. I've been thinking about robbing the bank. Okay.
I think about it sometimes. It's
Here's
true.
here's why I know that even if you seriously thought about it, here's why I know you wouldn't do it. You know the reason why I know you wouldn't do it?
Why is that?
Because it's not in alignment with who you are.
That's true.
It's not in alignment. So in other words, if somebody said, Vernon, go jump in a lake in the middle of Wisconsin in December where the water's 30 degrees, that's not in alignment with who I am.
You're not gonna
So
do
I'm
that.
right. So you don't. I wonder if Vernon did that. No, I didn't do that. You don't have to know because I'm not in alignment with that. It's not in alignment with me, right? So in other words, when we start talking about identity and who people are, when we start talking then about equity and bias, when we start talking about really egregious behavior, what a person's able to do, we say this with kids that are challenged with behaviors. We use the term self-regulate. So in other words, I can self-regulate, I can self-assess, I can do the introspection in real time and say, you know what, when that person did whatever it was that I heard on the news, I wouldn't do that. That's wrong because I know who I am.
Right.
I know who I am, and I'm trying my best every single day to live in alignment with those values. But see, if something's wrong with my values, I could see something egregious and say, you know what, I don't have a problem with that. Now you may say, you know what, Vernon, I've been around some people like that. They don't think there's a problem with that, and they think everything is okay. They think everything is whatever. So then we go even deeper with that. And again, we don't have time to do it because of time constraints. But then what I ask people to do then is to look at what are the influences? Who do people spend the most time around? Because people who have the most egregious behavior, when you look at two things. I typically drop this with clients in my private coaching and with the organizations that I work with as a consultant, but I'm going to drop this for your listeners. Two things tell me what a person is about. Two things. All right. Now, there are many things that can tell me what a person is about, but there are two things that can tell me what a person is about. Two things. And every person that's listening, I challenge you to do the introspection on these two things in your life. Okay. All right. People are wondering, what is this going to be? This is a great place to take notes. Okay. Two things, your circle of friends and your bank account.
Woo!
Okay. So between who you hang around and what you spend money on, I can tell what you're about.
No, you don't need to look at my internet history.
Right.
That was always my one. I was like, I just need to see the last 5 things on your internet history.
Well, here's what's going to happen on the internet history, right? if you're really engaged in things on the internet, you might be buying things. So
That's
that's
true.
going to
That's
show that's
true.
going to
Yeah,
show up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So your circle of friends and your bank account, what you're
Mhm.
spending money on. Because guess what happens? I'm gonna give your listeners and viewers a pro tip, man. I mean, this is a great episode to be in. We give them another pro tip. Because what we invest our time and our money into says what we're really about.
That's what when teachers tell me too, I'm like, listen, I save money every month. Like we get paid all right. Like maybe not everywhere around the country, some places are, but in New York City, we get paid good. And
Mm-hmm.
like it kills me when I hear teachers say that they like, oh, I gotta wait for the next paycheck to like go grab a drink. I'm like, bro, it's a drink.
Right.
Like, you know,
Right.
like
Right. So let
uh
me say this real quick about the equity thing. So when people say, you know what, Vernon, man, I'm all about equity. I'm about equity. I'm about, I'm about this. I'm about that. I often say this, and this applies. I've had many people tell me over the years, Vernon, I'm a leader. I'm about leadership. I'm all about leadership, Vernon, man. I'm a great leader. And this is the one question I ask people. And you never heard anybody say this, but it's what I've used over the years as a litmus test. I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me they're phenomenal leaders, and the first question I ask them is, "How many people are you mentoring right now?"
mm, I'm supposed to be doing
And then
that.
it's right, and then it's crickets, right? It's crickets. It's like, oh well, So in other words, when I used to work, and I worked all of my career in urban schools, but one of the schools that I worked at, the school was population wise, the school was 85% African American, 15% Latinx. And the kids used to tease me, when it came to teaching, and they used to say, "Mr. Wright, you're not about that life." And I said, "I am about that life. I'm in here with y'all, right? We're about that academic life. We're about that teaching life, right?" So, in other words, if I'm really about equity and I'm really about leadership and I'm really about change, the people I'm spending time around and investing time in and or my bank account should show that. And if neither are showing that, then that's a point for me to go ahead and ask myself, what's my level of commitment to this? Now, that's a conversation I really can't have with you first. That's a conversation Stephanie can't have with you first. The first place that conversation takes place with is with yourself.
Hmm.
Because if you can't be real with yourself, you can't be real with anybody else. Because guess how we make a change? And guess why? Because some of your listeners may be wondering, well, Vernon, why is it the circle of friends and why is it the bank account? Because guess what? As a mentor told me one time, I said, well, I said, sir, and this guy, he's very, very wealthy. He has nothing to do with education. He's a businessman, but a multimillionaire. And so I was talking to him one time many, many years ago. And I said, well, I don't have a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of money at the time. And he said, well, you know what you have, Vernon? And I said, what's that, sir? He said, you have time and energy. You have time and energy. He said, you can invest that. So whatever I'm investing my resources in, and typically that's three things: my time, my energy, physical, mental, right? My ideas, creativity, we'll call that energy. My time, my energy, and my money. So with my time, my energy, and my money, if I say I'm devoted to something, and with my time, energy, and money, if neither of the three can demonstrate action that I've taken, I don't necessarily know that that's a real commitment.
And I'm gonna argue that it would have to be at least 2 out of 3 to be like real authentic and not just that
Absolutely.
like kind of facade of making a PR statement or slapping up,
That's
Black
correct. Because
Lives Matter,
you have some people because you have some people that just say, you know what, if I do a post on social media with a statement and a hashtag, I'm good, Vernon.
Mm,
And so it's kind of funny you mentioned that. And I'll say this is another litmus test that I saw um that I saw this summer, and I kind of chuckled to myself because there were a lot of organizations that were putting out statements about equity. They were putting out statements about bias and all of these other things. But when I started looking at and I started inspecting and I started looking to see what have they done to open up opportunities for different people. Now, not just opportunities that are what we would call token opportunities, that are surface level opportunities. When I talk about making opportunities available to people, people will say, well, we'll create a position for that, or we'll do this for that, or we'll do this for that. Again, what are the things that we have that we treasure? We treasure our time, we treasure our energy, we treasure our money. When people open up opportunities for positions where leadership decisions and executive decision making can be made, and that decision making is surrounding time, energy, and money, that's a real commitment. Because if something is created, but the person has no influence or decision making over time, energy, or money, then it's just a position.
Right.
Because again, if somebody's really serious about this, if somebody's really serious about making a commitment to equity and addressing all these different things, what is it going to show? It's going to show in one of those three areas. And really, like you said, it's phenomenal. You made a great point. It really needs to be two of the three areas at the very least. What are the three areas for those taking notes? I'm going to give
Yeah.
them to you again: time, energy, and money. Time,
Yep.
energy, and money. And let me say this about Microsoft, because you originally asked me that as well.
We
What
come back to
Microsoft
it.
did, yeah, I tell you, we're going to come back full circle. There was an assistant principal I worked with many years ago, and we always she was so cute in terms of talking about how she would talk about giving feedback to teachers, right? And she used this cute term, and she would always say, you know, and so we called each other by our last names, and I won't say her last name out of respect for her, but she's a great leader and a great educator. But she would say, right, we're going to have to go ahead with these teachers, and we're going to have to close the feedback loop. So we're going to go ahead and close this feedback loop and close the loop on this and come back around to Microsoft EDU and say that, you know, Microsoft EDU understood and really had a previous commitment to equity before any of this happened. But when Microsoft EDU saw what was happening on the global scene, not just the national scene, but the global scene, Microsoft said, you know what, we need to have voices. And I am so honored to have been a part of really that dialogue and that conversation this summer to help people, because the book studies, there were a lot of people doing book studies and they got a lot of information. But let me drop the three steps again for those that are taking notes. They got a lot of information, but then they tried to go ahead and do the application. They skipped from step 1 to step 3. They missed step 2, which was the revelation. And when I say
Mm.
revelation, that's really the context and the clarity. If I don't get context and clarity, the application is really not going to work the way it's supposed to. How many people, say this quick story, how many people have gone to a professional development conference, whether that was 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, what have you? You got pumped up, you got all this information, then you got back to your campus and you got back to your school and you were like, okay, now what do I do next?
Yeah.
And you tried to start doing stuff just the way that whomever it was that shared it with you at the conference. But the only thing was that person at the conference that shared it with you, they don't live at your school. They
Mm.
don't live in your district. They don't have the context. They don't know your kids. So their information still has value, but it has to go through the lens of what? Again, remember, you need to have multiple lenses for every situation, professionally and personally. It didn't go through the lens of context and clarity. Once it goes through the lens of context and clarity, that lets me know how to make my
Right.
next move and what my next steps are. Because let me say this real quick to throw this in again, bringing this up again. I need the knowledge and the wisdom, and then I need to make authentic connections. So when I make authentic connections, the knowledge and wisdom can
Right.
guide me.
And I really like that part too, because when we were talking about like that introspection part, um, I think that sometimes people like think about that as being a very isolated kind of thing. And it's important. You definitely need to have that like by yourself thinking. Like you need to be good with yourself. You need to sometimes stop and ask yourself the questions like, who am I really? What do I want? But I also think that you to discover your biases and to fully understand them, you need to go out and talk to people and be like super intentional. Like talk to people who you would like not talk to. Like that person looks weird, or that person's like I don't know, they hang out with a weird group or something. And what I find is when you don't focus on those differences and you don't focus on like talking about the thing, like the elephant, and you just like do real life stuff, then you're like, whoa, like all that stuff I thought was like so stupid. Like,
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, you know, a lot of times when I'm doing speaking engagements or I'm working with clients, I'll ask them this question, which really relates very much so to what you've just mentioned. I'll ask them this question: what does the word community mean? And they'll say, typically, you know, what's a person's typical first reaction? Well, you know, the people that live around the school and in the
mhm,
neighborhood. And that is true, that is correct, but that's a surface level answer.
right, like
When I
literally, okay, yeah, we get it. People
Yeah,
are
so
here.
when I start looking at community, I start looking at who are people that I bond with, who are people I have common experiences with, and who are all of these other people that maybe I don't necessarily know, But guess what? When I start engaging them, in other words, here's another theme. It's coming back again. When I do what? I invite them into my story.
Hmm. And you
When
focus
I
on
invite,
those actions, right? Too, like not
absolutely.
necessarily what you're saying or how it looks, but what are you doing?
Right, because here's the thing. Because I know some people are wondering, well, Vernon, if I invite somebody into my story, then like, what do I do? What do I do with this? And what is my next step? Right? Because we in the business sometimes we do a really good job at talking about things in very much the process style or fashion, very much like here's a checklist of 10 things, right? Do these sequentially, 1 through 10, right?
Here's
So
a
what
rubric
happens is,
to
right?
judge it off
So
of.
when we get into these situations in real life, because real life is not necessarily a process of 10 steps followed sequentially, 1 from 10. So when we get into real life, people are trying to take prescriptive approaches and apply them to novel situations. Let me say that one again. People are trying to take prescriptive approaches and apply them to novel situations, and it doesn't work. So the thing to do is to first of all be authentic, or as they say on the streets, you need to be real. But I can't really be real unless I know who I am. Then once I know who I am, I get in terms of community, I get around other people and I start sharing and exchanging with them, and I learn what my level of realness is, and then I start learning about how real they are and what their authenticity is and what my authenticity is. And guess what happens? My authenticity goes to another level because I'm getting what? Knowledge and wisdom as I make what? Continue to make authentic connections. So then when I meet someone that I say, you know what, that person doesn't quite look like me. They probably don't have the same background as me. But when I invite them into my story, I'm authentic, right? I'm authentic.
Vibing.
And I'm going to give because this has been such a great episode. I'm going to give your I'm going to give your listeners something that typically I just reserve for my private coaching clients.
Oh, okay.
And this is something that I tell my private coaching clients to do all the time. And people will say, well, Vernon, there's something I want to share, and I don't know, and with this person, and I don't know, and how do I share it with them? What do I say? And simply you say this as a person sharing and they're talking, you say this, you say, you know what? This reminds me of a time when I experienced something like this. That's all you say.
Mm.
This reminds me of a time when I experienced something like this. Now, if you and I were talking and I said, you know what, Stephanie, this reminds me of a time when I experienced something like this, and I just stopped talking,
And be
what's going to
like,
be your natural inclination?
okay,
Well,
what did
tell me
you
about
experience? Like, come on.
right, right. Tell me about the experience. So then when I say that, very non-threatening, it wasn't directed at anyone. Really, it's me
Mm.
just speaking of me.
You're using that language thing at the beginning. You said some
This
linguistic something.
neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes, there
So
you go.
then it's right. So then guess what happens? The person opens up the door because what is the curiosity of a human being? I want to know what happened, because here's another thing.
But it
Man, I hope
matters
people
that they invited you in and you didn't just
absolutely
say it.
absolutely right. And here's the
Mm.
other thing too. What we have to understand is this: what always transcends color in cultures is people's experiences. People's experiences. So when somebody's sharing about something, because people have to understand this, and I tell my coaching clients this all of the time, we have a duality. We're hardwired as individuals, but we're hardwired to be in community. So guess what happens? As much as I am hardwired as an individual and I need time of introspection, I need quiet time, I highly recommend that everyone, I do it every single morning, very, very early. I mean, that people don't have to get up very, very early, but I recommend that every single person walk every morning and they have a time of meditation.
Mm.
But I just don't stay by myself, because what's the other half of me hardwired to do? I'm hardwired to be in community. So once I understand that, I have time during the day that is my time for me, and then I have other parts of the day when I do what? Like my phone has been buzzing off the chain today, right? So in other words, and I'm just so grateful to just have so many authentic connections with people. I'm in community with people.
So you gotta have time for both
But
ends.
yeah, you just say, hey, this reminds me of a time when I experienced something like this, and you just stop. And
Mm.
natural human curiosity, the people are going to say, well, tell me about the time. And then guess what you do? In an authentic way, you tell about your story. And
Mm.
when you, in an authentic way, tell about your story, for those that may be fans of Brene Brown, if we have any Brene Brown fans that are out there, it's a great time to show how you, through your story, can be vulnerable.
I'm not making any more episodes for the next 3 months. I'm just gonna read all these books that you gave me. um, but speaking of, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, speaking of like unexpected stories, what is that one unexpected kind of change, or like that one thing that you think could make such a big impact in reforming education and evolving us to that place where for decades now we've said that we want education to go, but we're stuck in this status quo? So like
Yeah,
what?
I'm going to mention, which they're very, very kind people to me, and I've been privileged to have known them for a little while. Dave and Shelley Burgess, and they often talk about, and Tara Martin as well. Throw a shout out to Tara Martin because she's a big part of Dave Burgess Consulting also. But Dave talks about quite often about how people had asked for educational reform for years, and then COVID forced it upon them. Right.
Mm,
So here's what I have said often. Now, again, before I say this, let me go ahead and share again with your listeners if they didn't pick it up at the beginning of the episode. And what a phenomenal episode this has been. So honored to have been on here with you all. What an honor and and a privilege and a pleasure to share and exchange ideas with you all in this thing called community.
yes.
Is My bachelor's degree is in business, Bachelor of Business Administration, with a major and a focus in economics and finance. So part of me has been a businessman and always will be. So, what I found out and what I've noticed over time, having served in different roles throughout this thing called education, is there's some things that educators are trying to respond to that formal educator learning cannot address. So, what I
Mm,
always said is, and I'm not saying that all educators should go through a full plan of this, unless it's something that they want to, but that educators start to look at, particularly, let me go ahead and enunciate, as one of my sophomore English teachers used to say, enunciate. But they should be able to have access to something that is like a very, very, very condensed MBA program. And the reason why is education has shifted so much, and it's involving so many different things that really don't have anything to do with education. So if my only background has been education and how to lead educators and how to teach curriculum and instruction and how to do maintenance and operation on a building and how to run a building and how to do assessments and how to do all these and discipline and all these other things, when you have something like COVID come in that is very much so outside of the realm of education, that really challenges all of your different systems, and it challenges all of your different approaches. And a lot of people talk about innovation, but COVID has really forced people into innovating, right? And if you don't have any formal education background in that, you're caught kind of flat-footed, and then you kind of
mm,
have to do what? You have to rely on your network of professional colleagues and or friends to kind of help you make this, what I call, a paradigm shift.
yeah.
So really looking at other disciplines outside of education, so that we have what Dave Burgess says. He says, read wide and live wide.
Yeah,
Read
that's one of the things
wide and
I've been
live
seeing
wide.
too, is that teachers, the teaching program is, the way it's made is, it's a lot of like, basically what it is teaching, a lot of like paperwork and all this other like jargon and stuff, but the value from it and the actual skill that I felt like it took was not very like high. Like it's an easy major, and I think that's part of the problem. I
Yeah.
and
So what happens is you get into that situation where you're like, okay, I have all this formal training and I'm ready to apply it, right?
Mhm.
So we talked about those three steps earlier. Again, going to go ahead and give them to your audience one more time. Information, revelation, application. So guess what happens? What happens is you have all this information. You're like, oh man, I've been studying for years on this. I've been reading articles. I've been doing research. Maybe I'm in a doctoral program right now and I'm working on my dissertation. So you have all this
Is it just
information,
me, or
right?
everybody's becoming a doctor all of a sudden?
Right. A lot of
Like,
folks are doing that. And so then you have all this information and you go to the application stage. But if I don't have breadth and depth, Like our friend Dave Burgess says, read wide, live wide.
Mm.
So if I don't have breadth and depth, when I go to apply, I'm just applying on a surface level. I'm not understanding what it really is below. So, in other words, again, that book by Sean Covey,
Mm-hmm.
son of the late great Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote, of course, all of the different books in the habit in the series Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. But
That's what I was
he
thinking.
talks about lagging indicators and leading indicators. So in other words, if somebody's exhibiting a behavior and I tell them don't do that behavior with my checklist of 10 things, that's a lagging indicator. I'm not going to the leading indicator, which is what is influencing this person's decision making that causes the decision making to produce this end result in behavior. And until I go all the way back to that, I won't have a significant change in behavior, and I won't have the other S. I won't have a sustained change
Mm.
in
So
behavior.
we
So
we
I
change how we
I can't
train our
have
teams.
yeah, I cannot have real change, whether you're working with students, whether you're working with colleagues at a school level, whether you're working at a district level or a regional level, state level, or national level, a worldwide level, a global level. You cannot have change unless the change is significant and is sustained. If the change is not significant and it's not sustained, you're not going to have real change. So then I have to ask myself, if I'm reverse engineering, what is significant change? What do I think significant change is? I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, this is what I have. Let me ask Stephanie. Hey, Stephanie, what do you think significant change is? Then Stephanie thinks about it and then she tells me what significant change is. So, in other words, what have I done? I've recognized and I've honored who I am as an individual, but I've also honored what? The other part of me that is hardwired to be what? Be in community with other people. Then, once I start understanding what significant change is, and we all kind of reach kind of a consensus on that. We don't all have to exactly agree, but once I reach a consensus on that, guess what happens? Then I can start asking myself this question, which is a huge question. What behaviors, what things, what thoughts are generating or producing this behavior? What's the source? What's the reason for this behavior? I can start peeling because, see, again, if I'm just speaking to the behavior, I'm not speaking to the solution. I'm not speaking to the change. I'm speaking to a band aid.
Mm.
See, once I speak to the change and I speak to what's really going on and what's causing the behavior, that's a leading indicator. That's not a lagging
They don't
indicator.
want to hear that though. They don't want to hear
Yeah.
that.
So because here's the thing, when people are when they're real, whether they're real about equity, whether they're real about growing their career, whether they're real about things and achievement in their personal lives, whatever it is that a person says, Vernon, I want to be absolutely, totally, 100% real about what this is, and this is going to be my thing, right? So it's going to come around. People are going to say, man, for 2021, this is going to be my thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Well, I'm going to, having worked with, I don't know how many clients over the years, having coached how many people over the years, how many organizations I've worked with, I'm going to say this. Those people that had the two S's, significant and sustained change, every single one of them, regardless of academic education, levels of academic education, regardless of race, regardless of backgrounds, regardless of cultural difference, regardless of all of those things, every single one of those individuals had a moment of introspection where they got real with themselves. Every single one of them. And so that's why when people tell me, Vernon, I'm serious about this, I'm serious about that, and then I ask them this, which is a quick litmus test to see if somebody's really serious about doing what they're doing and they've taken time, the introspection, right? Ask people this. They say, "Oh yeah, Vernon, I'm gonna do da 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 da." I say, "Okay, do you have that goal written down or typed in the cloud?" No, it's in my head. Because when you have your goals written down and or typed and they're in the cloud, and I have mine on my phone. I have mine on all of my devices where I can see them, and I look at them every single day. And when I get up, and I look a lot of times before I go to bed. That's my commitment to it. See, if I don't really write it down or I don't type it and I don't put it where my eyes can see it, it's not really real.
Mm.
And I've not really had the time of really committing myself. So, in other words, as a very, very famous self improvement, personal development speaker says, and I won't mention the person's name, but there's a difference between being interested and committed. We got a lot of folks that are interested, On January the 1st, 2020, they were interested. On December 31st, 2020, they'll still be interested. But there were some people between January 1, 2020 and December 31st, 2020, there were some people that changed and they went from interested to committed and they produced results.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what changes lives when you produce results? And let me drop this tip one more time. Another tip: a person's life won't change until they change.
Woo. I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you something about what you think the primary mover of change is, because I think that's a lot of the conversation that we're having right now too. Is this like, are we gonna create change from like a top down kind of systemic way, or is this just about like a lot of individual people in different ways? Because different people have to make different changes in order for us to all move forward. Is that how it happens? And I
Yeah.
find myself in that latter camp. I think it's more about individual change. I think the system matters and all that matters, but I don't think that we're gonna see. I think that's the second order, right?
Well,
You don't see
if
that
you look
change
at it,
until you change you.
yeah, if you look at an organizational chart, here's what you'll see. There's some people that are at the higher levels who have direct reports, and some of them can't, they're not bad people, but some of them don't have, we talk about skill and will. They might have the will to help you navigate through your own introspection, but they might not have the skill.
Mm.
And that's a whole nother thing I could do many, many years ago when I got into instructional coaching and I was working with teachers on changing behavior, because some administrators that I work with back then would say, well, you know what? They just need to teach better. And I was like, it's a little bit more than that. We have to change behavior. It's a little
That's
bit
great
more than
feedback.
that.
Teach better.
Yeah, like they would put pressure on them, right? And they're putting all of this pressure on them. And I'm like, no, that's really not the way to do it, because you're going to force somebody into compliance mode. And
Mm.
when a person gets into compliance mode, there's no innovation there. They're
Mm.
only going to do exactly what they need to do to stay out of trouble. And there's no innovation there. So then what I started looking at is, I had a colleague at the time, another leadership colleague at the time, and she was, and then she kind of got into corporate training and some other things, but we used to talk a lot about skill and will. And you can have a lot of people that have the will, that have direct reports. They're in leadership positions, supervisory positions, but they don't have the skill to lead their direct reports through their process. So in other words, I have to build the skill and will into myself and have that capacity. And if I don't know exactly how to do that myself, guess what the other half of me is hardwired for? I'm hardwired for this thing called community, which
Mm.
is why I'm going to say this. Whoever's listening to this episode right now, like, it is no coincidence. It is no accident you're listening to this, because I know that there's some people listening to this right now and they're like, you know what? Stephanie and Vernon, I don't know how they did it, but they got inside of my head and they spent like a half a day there. And they found out exactly what I was dealing with. And then they jumped out of my head and they did a podcast episode around it. So then I have to be in community with people that help to elevate me. My
Mm.
one word, for 2020, when I started out, my one word was elevation.
Woo.
My one word was elevation. Now I'll go ahead and I'll share this now, since we're pretty much at the end of 2020, because I already have my 2021 word. I won't share that here. I'll save that one as we get into 2021. But and then I switched. And when I switched from elevation, I switched to the word, and nobody uses this word in the PLN. Like, a lot of people use grow, and those are good words and everything. But anybody that knows me professionally or personally, that Vernon Wright dude, man, like, he's just a little different. I take that as a compliment. But
Oh
anyway,
yeah. Oh yeah.
but my 2020 word, I shifted from elevation, which was fairly rare. I shifted to the word immersion. And
Ooh.
so what I did is I went
That's almost
into.
opposites. Like,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. So I elevate. So I understood that in order for me to elevate, I needed to immerse myself. So
mm.
what I needed to do is I needed to become a student of success and a student of achievement and a student. Watch this. This is a great place to take notes. This is so good. I want to take notes myself. I had to become a student of self. I had to become a student of self. Once I became a student of success and a student of achievement and a student of self, I was then able to elevate, because here's what was happening. I was trying to elevate without becoming immersed. But
Mm.
see, I can't go ahead and truly elevate if I'm only operating with surface level information.
You
That's
got to
why I
bring it
have
up
to.
from
That's why I
within.
have to immerse and go deep. So
Mm.
when I immerse and I go deep, I get the what? We're going to bring it back again for those that are listening. I get the knowledge and wisdom, so that when I make authentic connections, the knowledge and wisdom can guide me.
Mm.
But I can't get that if I don't immerse. If I don't go, see, you got a lot of people on the surface level, and they're operating with surface level information, and they're telling me, "You man, Vernon, I want to go to the next level." You can't go to the next level with surface level information. Like you're gonna have to go deeper than that, because next level move is a deep move, and you can only make a deep move with deep information. So if
Mm.
you're telling me you want to make a deep move, the next thing I'm going to ask you is, who are you hanging around? What are you spending your money on? And what are you thinking about? And do you have your goals written down? Those are things that are pathways to lead you into deep introspection. And when you go into deep introspection, you can get the deep information you need, because surface level information, you can't use surface level information, or like you were talking about this summer, everybody's talking about equity. I can't take everybody's talking points and move to the next level with equity. I've got to go beyond everybody's talking points to understand how human beings are hardwired. Because guess what? Whether a person's black, whether a person is white, whether a person is Latinx, whatever they are, there's something that causes that person to behave in a certain way in terms of how they're hardwired. So if I don't get beyond that to understand human behavior, I won't get the two S's. What are the two S's that are required for real change? Significant and sustained.
Yep. Well, I feel like we are exactly where we are meant to be, and I feel like I'm getting that knowledge from you dropping it on me. And I mean, I've been following you. I'm like, okay, I see you. I want to talk to this guy. Then I had reached out once, but then I fell off. But we finally
Right.
connected and we vibing. And I feel like I feel like I'm on the cusp right now of like leadership. I feel like I'm really trying to figure it out, how to take the energy that I used to drive myself and how to get that to inspire other
Can I,
people.
can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
And you just said something that was huge. Another great point for people. Ooh, this is so good. I'm so excited. This is so good what I'm getting ready to say, because I said this to somebody just the other day. And when you said it, I was like, that's it.
Mm.
If you're taking notes, please, if you're in your car and you need to stop on the side of the road, please be safe. All right. But please get this down. Before you can become a leader of others, you must first be a leader of self.
Mm. Mm.
Mm. And we have people trying to lead others, and you can't even lead yourself. So when you said, and you were talking about, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you were talking about how you were leading yourself. And I was like, that's it. How many people are in leadership trying to be a leader of others, and they haven't even led themselves?
Mm.
Let me say that one more time. Before you can become a real leader of others, you must first be and become a leader of self.
And that's why I'm just super grateful to have you here to have this conversation, because it really takes all those things that you just do that kind of is flying back here, brings it to the forefront and allows you to step it up and hopefully immerse even deeper in the next, what do we got? Like a month and a half, not even a month or so
That's right.
left
That's
of
right.
this year, gear up for 2021.
And
And
I've already got my one word for 2021, folks. So if you're listening to this, you need to have your one word for 2021. You need to have it, and have at least one goal written down
write it
with a
down.
with a specific action and a specific outcome. Now, let me go ahead and drop another little pro tip. If people say, "Oh, Vernon, I've got that already," that's basic stuff. All right. Let me go a little, because I know we
Nah,
may
pro
have
tip,
some.
you could never hear a pro tip enough times.
Right, we might have some Rhodes scholars on here with us, right? Let me go ahead and go a little deeper. Once you have whatever the specific action is and whatever the specific outcome is that you want, right underneath that you say, I will commit to this by doing this, fill in a blank each day.
Mm,
There you
okay.
go.
Boom. I love it. All right, so drop the digits, drop the math, let everybody know where can they find you at, what's your favorite platform, a
Great.
website
Yes.
again, all that.
Yes, thank you so much. What an honor it is to have been with you all. So, across all of my social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, It is at sign the right leader, and that's THE, right with a WRIGHT, leader, LEADER. As well, the website is zeroapologyzone.com. For those that are interested in coaching, I have just started really kind of an online coaching platform. I've really been doing coaching just privately. And I had a friend of mine say, "Hey, you should branch that out into online coaching." So the website for that, just brand new, just really kind of starting get into that. The website for that is therightleader.com. And so that's if you want to sign up and somebody say, "Hey, man, I want to book some time with you. You want to go a little bit deeper." That is there. So, yeah, that a lot of different great things coming up. I have a big conference coming up February 1st through the 5th. Have some really, really heavy hitters that are going to be there at their conference. I'm honored to be speaking at that TCEA in February. Have some other things in the works. Can't really speak to those publicly yet, but those are coming forth. Let me drop a little hint for some folks. I dropped this on my IG the other day. For those that are wondering what IG is,
Okay.
Instagram is I posted a picture of my computer and I said that I've been doing a lot of writing and journaling in 2020, and that there might be an opportunity for people to see what those writings and journalings are.
Oh, well,
And
I will
I'll just kind of
certainly
leave it
be
at that.
awaiting that.
I'll leave it at that. So,
All
yes, thank
right.
you so much. What an honor. Zero Apology Zone. Go over there. You see all of my apparel and the team. So blessed to be around a lot of people that make up that team. And we're here to go ahead and say this: whatever it is that is noble and just, and how we fight for kids and we fight for families, and really to tell you this, how we fight for the dreams of others to become true, we make zero apologies about that.
Boom. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for being here. Have a blessed holiday because this is the night before Thanksgiving. It's gonna come out
Absolutely.
after, but thank you so much. Enjoy your day, family, the community. I know you're out there, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Woo, that was awesome. Vibing, right?
Woo, I was in the conversation taking notes. I would listen to it back. I was taking notes. Just dropped so much knowledge, so many titles of books, so many people, so many little actionable steps or pivots that I can start making right now. You have a few days left before break. Experiment. Have a little fun. Try just a little shift. So, like I said, putting those things in place right now. So by the time you get to the new year, you're just taking off, right? I know a lot of us, this situation right now is really hard. You're not sure what the school district is doing. You're teaching from home. You're in school. Da, da, da. But we got to control what we can control. So for more inspiration, motivation, advice, make sure you're following Vernon Wright on social media. Make sure you're following me on social media. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. Now more than ever, you got to lean into that teacher network. If you're like me, you're isolated alone in your room. So you really have to be proactive about reaching out. And I'm just so blessed to be able to speak on the regular with educators from around the world, to be able to hit them up in the DMs and be like, hey, I have this problem. Like, what do you suggest? Or I have this idea. Like, help me flesh it out. Or what do you think? Or let's work together. So really put it on yourself. Take the responsibility to reach out, to figure it out, and to make it happen. I know I get in trouble for saying that, but that's what that teacher power is all about. And I see that teacher power in each and every one of us. So make sure that you're right now starting to put those steps into place. You're also getting that rest, you're recovering, you're spending time with that family. And importantly, stay foolish, y'all.